Welcome to Breaking Through the Cloud, a podcast dedicated to celebrating the incredible achievements of women in the tech industry. In each episode, we sit down with women at different stages in their careers to discuss important topics such as work-life balance, career transitions, and building confidence. Through these conversations, we hope to inspire and empower women in the tech industry. We believe that by sharing stories of success and offering mentorship and guidance, we can create a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive tech industry for all. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, Breaking Through the Cloud has something for everyone, and we hope you'll continue to join us. So you're about to listen to a previously recorded interview, and I wanted to quickly make an announcement before you listen. We had an incredible guest come on from AWS, Sherry Karamdashti, who actually was recently promoted to General Manager North America for all of startups. So just a huge congratulations to Sherry. We did not know when we interviewed her, and she teases a little announcement, and that was it. And we just wanted to say congratulations, and we're really excited that we got to have her on the podcast for her to share all of her wisdom and insight. So please enjoy. I am so excited. Welcome to Breaking Through the Cloud, another episode. And I just am over the moon with the guest we have today. Allow me to introduce a woman that I just find both inspiring and interesting and all of the above, but I'm going to make her let me give a quick introduction. So we'd like to welcome Sherry Karamdashti to the podcast, currently the AWS Startup Sales Director. We're super lucky to have Sherry here today. She is an accomplished sales leader with a proven track record of driving revenue growth and building high-performing sales teams. Sherry has held prominent roles at a lot of leading technology organizations throughout her career, but that's not why I wanted her as a guest. Sherry has the innate ability to forge strong relationships with customers and teams, a very strong bias for action, and has just a true wealth of expertise, wisdom, and perspective. I think for me, the thing I love most about Sherry is how passionate she is about developing the next generation of sales professionals, providing guidance and empowering them to reach their full potential. She is also a strong advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's an extremely active supporter of female founders, which lends itself to the business she's in, being in the startup organization at AWS. And I think specifically her style of leadership just emphasizes collaboration, continuous learning, and challenging limits by thinking big. And also, I think Sherry has a passion for adventure, music, and shoes, probably jewelry too, which is, something we have in common. And I just could not be more excited to have you here today. We're going to have a fun conversation, and I hope that people listening get something out of it. I think every time we do one of these, people hear different things that help them where they are in their career, if they are at a crossroads, whatever that may be. So, Sherry, welcome.
Thank you. You're making me blush. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so this is the question that I'm going to consistently ask all of my guests. It's actually a two-parter, but I'll start with the first part. I want to know what your first memory of feeling success was. It can be at any point in your life, not just professionally, but when you remember feeling success, that thrill of success.
Most people do not know this about me, so it's interesting. So I used to play the violin in middle school, and it was when I made first string in orchestra. So I just I thought, wow, all my hard work paid off, and I made it. So that's the first thing that I remember, feeling like I made it.
Whoa, I did not know that about you.
Oh, I know.
Amazing. That's incredible. Not a easy instrument. I remember I did choir, which is somewhat embarrassing because I actually think I might be tone deaf, but I did choir growing up, and the people that did orchestra were always in the room. And I remember being so impressed by that talent. That's amazing. Okay, now I'm going to ask you the second part. Talk to me about your first memory of failure. and what that felt like?
It was in third grade.
Huh?
And I remember it was a test that my friends had the answer to. And I remember they passed around all the answers, and I felt like, oh my God, I am cheating. This can't be. But it was like this peer pressure, and everybody, so we kind of looked at it, and we didn't get caught, but I felt like I failed myself.
Because you took a shortcut that you might not have needed. Yeah. What's funny is my husband and I are big, like when we have people over, we always do table topics, and we always ask the success and failure question. And I find people in general have much more crystallized memories of failures rather than successes. So it's interesting to me because I think as we've had conversations with women over time, and I get the opportunity to work with so many women in this industry, one thing that I think is a commonality is that we can be very hard on ourselves. And I think part of what attracts me to you is seem as though you are such a positive influence and that you have such a grace about you. So I appreciate you sharing that. I think I had a similar experience in elementary school when we had to memorize all the rivers in Texas. So I can remember the first time the class had some paper that they were passing around. And you're like, this is not something that is right, but it's hard at that age. Yeah. Okay, so I want you to take me back. You have a degree in electrical engineering, which I would imagine the women in your classes were not plentiful. So talk to me about how you picked that.
Yeah. So I went to school undergrad at UCLA. I was one of 10 women in my electrical engineering class. So let's see, it goes all the way back to, I had a family of engineers. My brother was an engineer, my aunt was an engineer, my uncles were all engineers. And I never really thought about, I want to be like them per se. I was good at math. I was great at the sciences, and I wanted, to be in sciences and math. So I said, well, I'm going to be an engineer. And my mom was not very happy. She's like, we have so many engineers in the family. We need a doctor in the family. So yeah, she was not happy about it.
So when do you remember realizing you were good at math and science?
Oh, like very early on, So I was in all the advanced math classes, in fifth grade, and I was doing calculus by, eighth grade. So yeah, I liked math.
Was it innate in you, or did you have your parent, was it just part of who you were, you think, from day one?
Yeah, I think I just gravitated towards it. I think I just loved problem solving. So it just seemed like a really good, there's a right answer to it. So yeah.
I think that there is something very safe and clean about math. I've always said that, the numbers are the numbers. So I think although in this day and age, how people, can manipulate numbers is one thing, but I always go back to math is math and the data is the data, which I know we talk about a lot. What do you think people can do, whether you're a parent or a mentor or you're a teacher, to get more diversity interested in math and sciences early? For me, it is such a huge thing. My son is in an advanced math group at school, and there are a lot more boys than girls, which bothers me. Although my son is in the group, I want young girls to be interested in STEM. And I think that is an important thing that I don't know if we have the answer to, but I'm curious your perspective.
Yeah. It's funny. When I grew up, I didn't feel like I was different. I didn't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm the only girl in this class when I was in college, even though I gravitated to all the girls, and some of my best friends are from there. But I think I don't know, maybe not identifying that we're different, like, was a pro for me. Like, I didn't think I was coming from behind, so to speak, right? So I had this like innate confidence that was, because I was surrounded by examples. My aunt was a engineer. My uncles were, like, it didn't matter if boys or girls were engineers. So I never grew up thinking that, I'm different, right? And even I remember a very distinct moment. It was maybe like in 2017 or 18, and one of my account managers, we were in an executive briefing center in Seattle, and he said, "Sherry, there's 24 people in this meeting, and you're the only woman here." And I was like, "Oh, wow, you're right." Like, and it was like, I wasn't even thinking. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be aware, and I am very hyper aware, and I want to make sure that, I serve as a good role model and a representation. And then I, develop, programs or an environment that people feel encouraged. So I don't mean to belittle that. But I just think that for me, I didn't feel like I was different or coming from behind. And I think that confidence is important. And I think it was just my environment, luckily.
It's everything. I think having that confidence and the ability to feel successful and feel comfortable is so important. And I think that point is huge, because I think it is more about how we encourage giving people the confidence. And it's not a boys girls thing necessarily at this age. It's okay, this is what STEM means and how it can be utilized. And for me, I don't think I realized what doors it would open when I was young. And I also really liked math and science. And again, my dad's a statistical engineer. So I saw it, I had it in my house. But I think for people that don't, it's much harder. And that goes back to like how we participate in communities and programs. This whole thing with my son has given me an opportunity to think about like, well, how can I show up at his school and participate and give the young girls an opportunity to learn what's available to them in technology and sciences and math by pursuing that. So I love that.
It's really important. It's important.
So important. So talk to me a little bit about, you went into technology, and although electrical engineering, obviously you can kind of build a thread, but how did you get into Intel, and what did that look like from a career standpoint? I think that's an interesting story.
It was. So I'm gonna have to tell you the story, and it might give you an idea of how old I am, but I'm just gonna go with it. When I was in college, most people didn't even have emails. So we did, because we were engineers. And so we would all have emails. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Email my friends who I see every day? So it wasn't like technology wasn't a big thing, right? And so, we were programming. I was doing integrated circuits and all these things that are learning. And I decided I really didn't want to program or sit in a lab or design integrated circuits. Or telecommunication satellites or whatever it was. So at UCLA, companies would come around and they would have interviews, and they would basically be hiring for new college grads. And Intel had a technical sales engineering program. So they would come and hire engineers from college into a sales program. So so I interviewed for it, and it was the best experience that I went through. It was an amazing experience of just, it felt like a little, brotherhood, sisterhood together. And we would do rotations in different organizations at Intel. So you would learn about the company and build your connections. And then once you went through the program, and then we moved around to different sites like Santa Clara, or I went to Arizona, I was in Folsom. Where the prison is.
There's a kind of famous song about it, I think.
Yes. I think it's Johnny Cash, maybe.
Yeah.
So, and then once you go through that program, you roll to the field. So I went into the field as we call them field sales engineers. So think of them as just account managers. And so, it was very eye-opening. So back then it was like a crust. I was in, hardware, selling chips. I was sitting through with like VP of engineering, going through timing diagrams for their motherboard designs and things like that. So yeah, it was the best thing that I went through. And then I again forged really, really important friendships there that are, still friends of mine. And it was a great opening, and I never left sales again. So I kind of started and stayed in sales.
When you said you realized you're like, I did not want to program, I didn't want to do, like, did you have a specific moment? Was it a project? Was it something that you were just like, I'm done?
Yeah, I remember very clearly. I had a 4.4 GPA going into college. So I was I was in all the advanced, It was the first B I got. And I was like, I can't do this. Oh my God. I just like, this can't be my career. But yeah, so yeah, it was, I did okay in college. I graduated.
But I think about that, and it's so interesting because you could have made one of two decisions. You could have gotten a B and said, I'm going to figure this out. I'm all in. I'm going to turn this B into an A. But instead, there was some voice inside your head that was like, maybe this isn't for me. I want to see what else is out there. And it changed the course of your life.
Yeah. It was my B. B was an integrated circuit, by the way. So it was and that was my major. I was like, wow, what did I do? But, I studied, I graduated, with a B plus GPA, and, it was all right. I mean, all right.
Listen, I always laugh. I'm like, I think the most important thing is that, like, you finish something. And I think even nowadays we're seeing how different it is in terms of how college is perceived. And there's a lot more ways to get to where you want to be than it was in the past. And for me, I was like, this was what you did. And now it's very different, which I think is amazing. You meet with all these different founders, and how different are all of their stories about how they came to building company.
It's humbling, actually, to see like the amazing things that they did in college, and and bringing it to life in their companies. It's amazing.
So talk to me about moving from Intel to Oracle. And you were at Oracle for almost 15 years. It was a really long career that you had a lot of different jobs and clearly a lot of success. But what attracted you into that organization?
Yeah, I felt like I kind of had 4.5 years of hardware. I did some really cool things, like Network Appliance wasn't even like public, and they were this little company, NetApp, that I called on, So I was just getting tired of hardware, and I thought, at the time, Intel had this thing around the spiral that like hardware drives software. You need software to take advantage of hardware. You need hardware to run the software. And I was like, wow, I need to be multidimensional. So I wanted to go into software. And so I had some friends, and they were actually solution architects. So they were pre-sales. And they used to badmouth like, oh, salespeople don't know anything. And I was like, wow, I don't want to go, I know something. I don't want to lose my technical, aptitude. So I actually went and became a solution architect back at Oracle. And I did development tools, like Java development tools, analytics. We call them decision support systems back in the day. And so I became a solution architect, and then I evolved and went into the application side, and I led a team, and that was my first management experience in 2001.
Well, I want to hear about that. So I think the transition from individual contributor to leadership is one that is intense. Mm-hmm. So talk to me. Yeah, we've both had, that experience, and I think people can sometimes run from that experience. So talk to me about what drove you into it and what the first leadership role felt like.
Yeah, and I think I just, it happened somewhat naturally. I think sometimes people feel like I have to become a manager because that's how I'm going to progress. Okay. And that is absolutely true for some people, but not always. And so I kind of took on like a team lead. And so I always tell people, like, you should do the job you want before you get it, right? So you have to present yourself as, I can do it, or contribute to the org more broadly, whatever it is, right? And so so moving into that was not that difficult. It was kind of a natural progression. I did interview. I wanted to go back to sales. I'm a solution architect. I interviewed for a sales manager position that was open, and at the time it didn't work out. There was another candidate. I was really bummed about it. But what was amazing is that director was like, I'm going to have another role. So let's keep in touch. And I ended up, working for her. So
what was your biggest surprise about being a leader that you didn't expect when you stepped into that role?
How much, I know it now, the word for it, but at the time I was like, I didn't know I had to be a therapist, but you have to have some emotional intelligence and be able to understand people and, figure out what motivates them and, how to help them. Some people want you to stay out of the way. And so it was a lot of that, people chess versus content, at first.
Yes. They often say the best individual contributors don't always make the best leaders. Yeah. And I think that's partly to do with when you're a leader, you have to give up kind of this notion of you being the most important part of your day. It's how are you supporting your team? And that's an adjustment for people. Yeah.
Well, especially if you're in a company that leads from the front and you have, and so as a manager, part of or a leader is to, represent your people and give them opportunity to shine and deliver through them instead of you leading and being in charge. And so, I think that could be a challenge, and not everyone can be as successful as they might be able to as an IC.
How in the world did you make the decision to leave a company after being there almost 15 years and join AWS, which, by the way, at the time was not the AWS that is the juggernaut that we know today. Yeah. It is, something
nobody knew what AWS was when I left. Yeah.
The growth happened so quickly and at a pace that I think, books upon books will be written about and dissected over time. So that is, to me, so fascinating. How did you make that decision?
Yeah. One of the reasons that I left Intel, and it became one of two reasons why I left Oracle, is really who you work for, and the belief that you have in your leadership. And so at the time, I had some things happen that I felt like I was doing the right thing for the business, and my leader didn't see it and didn't have my back, and then realized later what I was doing and then had my back. So it just kind of turned me off, and I was like, I don't want to work for someone who doesn't have my back, right? And then at Oracle, I ended up, leading the analytics team. So I had a sales solutions, and Amazon was my customer. And so I had exposure to AWS two ways. In 2011, so my team was selling Oracle applications, and they had a private cloud. It was very expensive, and we had acquired PeopleSoft. And one of our partners said, hey, I implemented PeopleSoft. Let me demo it to you on this thing called AWS. And, I can charge a subscription, and it's X dollars. And it was literally pennies on the dollar of what Oracle was paying. And I was like, what is this thing? And it's it's AWS. So that was 2011. And then, of course, in 2013, I sold our BI tools that we use at AWS to AWS. So I was aware of what AWS was. And my old boss who hired me into Oracle came over to AWS. So again, you work for people, people work for people. Obviously, we work for great companies too, but it's the people that kind of help navigate. And so I think all my career moves, I think, were a lot of luck and some smarts, but it was a lot of luck and just, kind of following good people.
Well, part of why I appreciate you so much is that you say that, because I do feel like it is so much about timing, and no one can tell the future. So I think for you, just being true to yourself and saying, listen, it was a little bit about right time, right place, but you wanted to work for the individual that you followed, and you trusted them, and you were excited about that opportunity.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what AWS was like then.
What can I share? Okay. So let's see. So I started leading a team. They were somewhat new too. So I think a couple of my reps were 1 month in before I came in. So I came to the San Francisco office. There was the director and one other manager in San Francisco. So And that was mostly what we called the territory mid-market space. So think of all the startups, and AWS, like our original early customers.
Exactly.
Right?
Startups. Yeah.
And so many of them, didn't even know they had account managers, and they didn't. So we started building it. And I remember my reps were like, oh my God, founders and CEOs want to talk to me. And they came from like Oracle, who their customers didn't want to talk to them that much. So it was kind of exciting, right? To be at a company where people were so excited to have access to an account manager and a solution architect, and they were doing cool things. Two, we didn't forecast. And I was like, I said to my boss, I'm like, what do you mean we don't forecast? Like, so it was like this, so it's like we were this, almost like, a startup trying to figure out how to forecast. And so we didn't have that. My first day, so we have it now. We have private pricing agreements with our customers. Then we had people would be like, well, I'm spending all this money. I'm like, yeah, there's a public price. Go on the website. They're like, what? And so I remember when I first had a manager's meeting with my VP, and it was this one pager on what we called enterprise discount program at the time. It was one pager of what it should be, why we should do it. And it was kind of, the early days. So it was just cool to just go and develop a community, experts in the community, and startups. And they were definitely fun times.
I love what an advocate you are for the startup community. I think as an outsider looking in, it's something that you're deeply passionate about, and it appears that you have a lot of fun doing it. Is there something that is connected about your early time at AWS and what that experience is like, and what some of these companies are doing that you find a kinship there? Like, what has attracted you into the startup world?
I didn't come from startups. I was strategic accounts, retail. I had like eBay and Amazon, and it's just I didn't come from
customers. Yes.
So it was like just refreshing. And our quote sales cycles, we didn't really have one. It was kind of like, let's try this new product. This is what you want to do, and it was like this builder mentality that it was so refreshing for me. And somebody recently told me, Sherry, you've been here 10 years. You're kind of niche. You're like the startup Sherry. And I'm like, I'm kind of proud of that, right? So I get it. As you grow in your career and take on more roles, you do need to expand your horizon and, expand your swim lanes and exposure and experience. But I always guided others that, if you find something that you're passionate about, and if you become kind of the subject matter expert or the knowledgeable person, then you can do things for the company or for the org that's really valuable. Then it's a win-win, right? You're passionate about it and the org needs you. So, I'm the niche startup Sherry.
By the way, I think it's an excellent niche and one that you should be proud of. Give me a little insight in the differences that you've seen of being a leader of individual contributors versus a leader of leaders, and how you change your style and what that looks and feels like on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think what the main difference was, I had a bigger voice into the organizational thing. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a leader or a director to have a voice, because you can, and I did, and I brought very interesting things and new innovative ideas and programs and things when I was an individual contributor and a manager. But I think as a leader, you have a responsibility to represent, your customers, your people to the broader org. So I think that was important. But the second thing is now you're delivering through managers, right? So when you deliver through ICs, it's a little bit different, right? The skill sets of a manager. And I think we were hiring so quickly, and just being the steward of the Amazon culture became even more critical, because you have to learn to scale yourself and build good leaders who can be stewards of the culture and reinforce our culture and our leadership principles. So I think that was the biggest shift for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it's a totally different experience, or for me, it has been. And I always say this, the further you get from the customer, I think the worse it gets. So one thing I really admire about you is regardless of the role of being a leader of leaders for you, you're extremely engaged with your customers. And I think that is super important. You cannot ever lose touch with that.
Yeah, and I think you lose your value to the org, and the ones that end up being stuck behind their computers. I mean, granted, you can have customer meetings now with your computers, but not speaking with customers. How are you going to bring input back into the business? How are you going to hear how people are using products or what the industry trends are? So I do think, and I give this advice to our leaders all the time, you have to be in front of your customers. You have to be forging relationships. But more important, so many things happen when you're out there and people tell you things and they open up to you and you build long-term relationships with our executives, and it's really important to be in the field.
And such an opportunity to learn and get insight. And part of why I love working with AWS, and for me, it's been just an incredible journey of the partnership, but is that customer obsession piece. And I think that is the thread that is never lost across the organization. And I think the commitment to that is what differentiates AWS from a lot of the companies that are out there. One thing I want to get your insight on, because you do speak to so many founders and specifically female founders. I know you've had all these conversations. There's so many stats about how few female founders get funded and get told, yes, hey, we want to back your company. We want to give you the opportunity. As you're meeting with female founders, what are the common threads or the things that you hear about how they're overcoming headwinds and objections in the marketplace? Because for me, just it's inspiring to see some of these companies that you're working with, but I know that it has not been an easy path for a lot of them.
Yeah, a common thing I hear is, the male founders get the funding and the females get the women get the coaching. So, when they do their fundraising rounds, they get a lot of coaching and feedback. And I think feedback and coaching is important. You take those. I think the most successful ones that I've worked with are very mission driven. And founders in general are mission driven, right? Like the successful ones anyway. So they believe in their product, but the ones that I've seen have, this like deep connection to the mission of their company. And I think it's that resilience that is required to get, and not all of them have funding, right? They just need to win customers. They need to hire people. They need to build products. So it's not just around the funding space. It's just believing in your company and then attracting good talent to come work for you and build with you and get behind your mission. And I think, a lot of the women founders have that trait.
It is magnetic to be around somebody that has purpose and drive in that capacity. And I think you're so right about that. But I love the distinction of the money versus coaching. But I also think what I've heard is you've interviewed and you've talked to different female leaders, and things that I've seen is the ability to discern coaching and not take it personally and not take it even as reality, right? I think everybody sees things through a different lens, and you can only assume that somebody is giving you that perspective. It doesn't mean that it's true. And I think that being data-driven is another commonality that I've seen of these founders. Yeah, it's amazing to watch that over time. Yep. So you mentioned something, and I want to get your feedback on it: resilience and emotional resilience. Give me a look into your career and potential times where you've had to use grit and emotional resilience to get through something hard, because I do feel like it is critical in driving a successful career to have that.
Yeah. Well, the first one was early in my career at Intel. It was a customer, I won't say who, motherboard manufacturer, and I realized they were buying chips off the gray market. So they would have favorable pricing from Intel, but then they would go and get cheaper ones. And so we had a contract. So I noticed on their fax machine, yes, they were fax machines, that they were getting pricing of the gray, on the gray, and I had to have a very serious conversation with the CEO of that company. And I remember him, pointing his finger at me, this older guy. He's like, you weren't even born when I started this company, and I'm going to have to put a for sale sign and So my my boss, when we got back to the office, was like, Sherry, you're young, which I was. He didn't say it, but I knew he meant it. He didn't say it, but like, you're a woman in a male-dominated industry, and you have to have thick skin. And I was like, okay. I thought I was pretty tough with the CEO, but does he think I need to be tougher? So it was a really good lesson to not take things personally and have thick skin. And, so that was my first advice and lesson. So, but I think, you have moments where you're doing great, you're feeling like you're on this trajectory, and something totally out of your control happens. And you're like, oh my God, like, do I have to leave this team? Or, oh my God, do I have to, switch jobs? I love where I am. And then you let it define you, right? And I have to admit, I love my job. I am very driven by my career, and I want to do well. And I tie a lot of my identity to it. So, yes, good or bad, it is what it is. I admit it. But, but when you do that, then these the things that you don't control can impact like how you feel about yourself. Like, oh my God, and like, you're like, this worthiness, of questions kind of into play. So I do, I've had several of those in my career. Luckily, things worked out. And, every move I made, every new team I developed, I came to the startup team as a segment in 2020 to help build it. It was, the best decision I made in my AWS career. So, and at the time it was uncertain. We were reorganizing, we were trying to figure out who goes where. And so, it's like the resilience and having thick skin and kind of having faith in yourself just kind of helps you get through those, or help me.
I love that. Probably because I can identify with it. I think, do you have any tips? Because I think women that are very career driven and ambitious, it is somewhat difficult to separate role from identity.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any tips for when you do have the things happen out of control and how you can shift out of that into understanding that it isn't about who Sherry is? It's just the nature of being in business, which we've picked a business that changes every single day.
Yeah. I think everyone needs like a grounding, whether it's a person or a unit or a tribe, whatever that is for you. I think that's what it is for me. For me, it's my mom, because she was always, she was career driven. People that know me from childhood, like, you were bred for the corporate world. And I don't think that's true, but, she's very, proud of, the daughter she's raised, but she's also very reasonable and kind and open-minded. So she's definitely my grounding person. And then I have my tribe of friends who have also been career driven and gotten through the journey. So you just kind of have to, or it could be your significant other or your children or whatever. I think that grounding group or a person is how I get through.
It's so true. I think that's why they talk about the importance of some type of work-life balance, is so that you don't get too caught up in this is who I am and that's it. Having that grounding and having that ability to understand that it's not everything. And there are so many things in any corporate work environment that are outside of your control. When you really look at it, the scope of what you can control is very small and it can be very intense. And I think for women in particular, there's a lot to unpack with that. So thank you. Okay, we're gonna wrap up with a couple of questions that I think I find fun. So if you could get in a time machine, knowing everything that you know now, and talk to Sherry at, let's say, 9-10 years old, like, what would you say to her?
Care less about what other people think.
Totally. It is so hard. I think that the one thing that I found with age comes a little bit of that, which is just the best gift you can get.
Isn't it? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
No matter how confident you are in your abilities, like we still care, like what other people think, how we're doing, because we're hard on ourselves. So yeah, I would just, that's it, you know.
Are there specific beliefs that you believed were edict fact early on in your career, and you look back and say, what was I thinking in terms of how things had to be or how things had to work? Are there any things that have shifted majorly for you over time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I and I think it goes back to just being hard on yourself a little bit. Is, you know, I like, I mean, I don't know if it was just my culture or like the family. Like, I always was brought up to be humble and not feel like you're special, even though you may be amazing. So I think there was a time where I noticed certain peers and they thought they were so special and so amazing. I was like, really? Like, you know, so I think there was a shift of like just believing that, like, if you believe it, like, you know, don't make yourself smaller, just to be humble, right? So I do think that there were certain observations of my peers that kind of shifted that. I was like, wow, like I have more than that that I can bring to the table, and you know, they feel like they're so amazing, and it was like, wow, I have a lot to learn from that. Not that they weren't amazing, but it was yeah. So so I think that there were certain shifts that I think in my attitude and in my work and things like that. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, no, I think what you said is basically you had this belief of like, okay, it's important to be humble. And when you think about how that shows up in the corporate environment, I think it can be detrimental in a way if you're not being thoughtful about talking about what you've done and being able to talk about your successes and how that's impacted the organization, which we just did a podcast last week talking about negotiating. And often when women go in to negotiate, it is never as well received as when a man does. And we talked about part of that is being able to really articulate what you've done, be data driven, and be confident in, you know, how you've given back to the organization and gone above and beyond, which you talked about that piece of advice of do the job before you have the job, which I love that. I very much am a believer in acting as if in life when you want something. Talk to me about advice that you would want to give somebody just starting out in their career within tech.
Yeah, I would say, you know, a lot of people have asked me that, and these different advices have popped up. But what I would say is really think about matching your skill set and what you like to the job you want. And I think so many times we should, or I should do this, or this is my path. And so I do think, and it could be within the same company or the same group, but just to look at the skills that you want to develop, that you want to develop, and then get to a role that, you know, that is meaningful for you. And I think we sometimes don't take the time to reflect on those things.
The should word is probably my least favorite word. When people start saying it, even I'm like, okay, does that mean, should we, or do we just think that we should? And should we be thinking about it in a different way? I think it can be a big limiter of creativity, opportunity, all of that. I love that. So stay away from should. Before we close today, I am just very grateful for your just friendship, mentorship, how you've supported me. How do you build a network of people, not just grounding, but around you to go to advice? What does that look like? How do you do it? Because you seem gifted at it. What does that look like for you? And I know a lot of people want that skill set.
Yeah. Well, I knew I wanted to be connected to you the minute I met you because you're so awesome. And I think that's what it is. You have to have like authentic connections. Like I was never the schmoozer. I mean, I am a schmoozer because I'm very social and I love people, but I do it authentically. But I wasn't like, oh, I have to go network because I want to have this circle to turn to if I need X, right? So I think in general, I think authentic connections are the best ones. And And I gravitate to different kinds of people. And sometimes they're people that have in common with you're a woman, you're successful, you're career driven, and you're fun and fashionable. And so, those things, are common things are important. But I think like authentic connections are the ones that are lasting and fruitful, honestly.
I could not agree more. I think one of the keys to good networking is finding that thread that you want to pull at within somebody and keep pulling. And that's always what I think changes the dynamic of what is interesting to you about this individual. And my guess is on the other side of the street, that person is interested as well. And you can really build a network that is, to your point, authentic over time, which is more valuable to me than just sheer number of connections or people that are in your cell phone than really meaningful people you can reach out to.
Yeah, and I think I was at a leadership meeting and we had a speaker, and I think they talked about followership. Leaders that have followership, right? And so and a component of that is that authentic connection, because I always said I'm going to be the leader that people want to follow and want to work for, and it was never like, oh, you got to come from work for me because you can make more money, which is important. But like, it's more around, I wanted them to come to me because they knew they could be successful. They could learn their skills. They could grow in their career and be supported. And so that followership comes from those authentic connections that you make. It's really important too.
I love that. And you have that in spades. People trust you and they know that you drive results and success, but that you care about them. And that makes a big difference.
I do care about them.
Yeah. Sure. I've heard it from plenty of people that have worked for you. And I think that is really special.
I'm very humbled. Thank you.
So the last and final question, and then we're going to wrap, is tell me what you are most excited about for the rest of 2023. What are you most excited about for the rest of the year?
Well, I have some exciting news potentially, but there's, but I don't know. I'm excited about my good news that's going to come out soon. But
I love that. That's all you have to say. I think it's great. I would love to be like a news breaking organization. I love exciting.
It depends when this is going to air. Yeah, but no, I would say honestly, like this is a quote tough year, right? I think I've lived through tough years too in 2008 and 2009, but it's tough in many different ways, and especially for AWS. And we talk about this with my team, and it's like the tough times are the times that you can step into the moment and lead and kind of make an impact. And I think we're gonna look back and be like, remember those, 1 or 2 tough years we had, and like, this is what we ended up doing. And so I am looking forward to making history this year with my team and looking back and going, wow, like we really, we stepped into the tough moment and we led through it and we accomplished these things. So I think that's what I'm excited about.
I could not agree more. We always talk about the context of like wartime versus peacetime. And I think wartime leadership, when things are tough, requires a lot of intention, which I hear that in your voice. So thank you for sharing with us today. It was a joy, and I'm super excited for everybody to hear this and learn from you, and just honored that you were willing to join. So that concludes another episode of Breaking Through the Cloud with Caylent. And Sherry, thank you again.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and review on the platform you're listening on. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at podcasts@caylent.com, and you can find the email address in the description below. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.